Well, I think essentially there's been recognition from the Biden administration that the tourism industry has been particularly hit hard by the fact that foreigners aren't able to freely come to the U.S. Even though, Europe was open up to Americans that were fully vaccinated, so that policy was not reciprocated by the U.S. So there was a lot of pressure from different industries that have been hard hit by this, but also due to the fact that almost all of the cases of COVID in the US are Delta. So there isn't really a fear that there's going to be foreigners bringing in more cases of Delta, and the US still remains one of the worst countries in terms of COVID. So I think these two things helped shape changing this particular policy.
Yeah, so how are they going to minimise, though, the potential for further spreading and people coming back with potentially, with the virus and spreading it even further?
Well, the problem is that what the US is trying to address is the fact that internally they have a bigger issue.
Yeah.
And that is that you have 80 million people that are eligible to be vaccinated that have not received one single dose. So I think what the Biden administration is concentrating instead is looking at how they can ensure that more Americans get vaccinated, and that's the reasoning behind this federal mandate, which would basically be that any company with over 100 people, they have to ensure that their employees are vaccinated. Now, there's only 2% of US companies that are over 100 people, but that's still 80 million people. And the mandate also extends to federal employees, to health workers, and anyone on a government contract. And so you'd face a fine if you don't address this. And this is the hope that they can get more people vaccinated and get the situation domestically under control.
They have greater problems too, though, domestically, because there's still great tension between the federal government and states on the way forward, with some states being, absolutely not even belligerent, but just, in no way prepared to go on with these mask mandates and mandated vaccinations.
Right. And so there's going to be tension because, as you're right, and it's really divided along partisan lines, with Republican states, some of them having a mandate that you can't mandate wearing masks, that you can't mandate having employees have vaccine. And then you have about 50 states that have some sort of mandate that tend to be led by Democratic governors. So there will be lawsuits. People will be fighting this. And you see that there's also fights going on at the local level. Some of these fights deal with teachers, for example, and schools, where you have at the district level about 25% of all districts have some sort of mandate that teachers have to be fully vaccinated. And you have two states in the U.S. That say that, the entire state, this is for the entire state, that everybody has to be vaccinated. But this has become a real political fight. I think it started with the Trump administration, that suddenly vaccines became political. And it's important to remind viewers that every single state in the U.S. has a vaccine mandate for children K through 12, for other different types of infectious diseases like measles and mumps, rubella, and polio. So this has really become political because suddenly everything has become politicized in the U.S.
Yeah, that is so true. Is the opening of international borders or borders to international travellers going to become political? Is it going to, be contentious, do you think, the fact that they won't have to go into separate quarantine, they can quarantine at home?
I think it might become political because everything that Biden does became political, and everything that Trump did became very politicized. I think you're going to see Republicans criticizing this move if they say, well, this is going to bring in new variants. And you may have the Democrats supporting this because they're hoping that this is going to revive the economy for the tourist industries and so forth. But there will be more people that are in favor of this because of how it should impact the economy, and because the U.S. hasn't really been able to bring itself out of the COVID slump. And it also is just common sense that if you've been fully vaccinated, you're less likely to at least transmit the disease. That doesn't mean you're less likely. That doesn't mean that you won't get it. But there is some research to show that. And so they're looking to take a more practical route, as the European Union did, in order to encourage U.S. tourists to come to Europe.
Yeah. Natasha, in just a few hours, Joe Biden will make his maiden presidential speech at the UN General Assembly. He's under quite some pressure internationally at the moment, isn't he?
He is. He started off on a really good footing because he was trying to communicate this idea that America is back, diplomacy is back. But I think some of the issues for Biden is that he's made some moves unilaterally without really consulting key Western allies, and that hasn't sat well with many NATO members, with close allies within the European Union. And there's this feeling that he needs to be more committed to the multilateral action and to diplomacy, as his, Secretary of State had commented from when he first took over. And of course, the whole issue in Afghanistan, pretty much leaving without much consultation, hasn't helped matters. So I think he's going to have to put a concerted effort to convince allies that he does want to work together, because in particular in dealing with things like the virus, this requires a lot more cooperation and not less.
Yeah, and that's what he hopes to get everybody together on when he's over there. So it'll be fascinating to watch. Thanks, Natasha. Good to talk.
Thanks for having me.